I have to admit, sometimes I do wish I were in North Carolina. But this is a beautiful, crisp, sunny day here in Ontario, and I'm delighted to be back at St. Andrews. I think I was here for anniversary 3 years ago, so it's nice to be back in the pulpit and back with you. I suggest we get right into our scripture passages this morning from the book of Genesis and from the Gospel of Luke, for there's a lot I'd like to cover. First, let's look at that passage from Genesis. It's a real turnaround story, isn't it? I mean, one day Joseph is languishing in prison, and the next day he's the second most powerful man in Egypt, put in charge of a major capital campaign. His task is to build new and bigger storage barns to hold all the corn and other food staples during those years of plenty. And under his leadership, barn after barn after barn begins to sprout up in every town and village in Egypt, each barn overflowing with the produce of the land. As the author of Genesis tells the story, so Joseph stored up grain in such abundance that the sand, like the sand of the sea, that he stopped measuring it. It was beyond measure. It seems that Joseph wasn't just sort of a head-in-the-cloud type dreamer. He was also an astute administrator, a charismatic leader, and a capable accountant, at least until he couldn't count any higher because of the incalculable abundance. And if he'd taken only the smallest cut of the profits when that grain was eventually sold, he became a very, very, very wealthy man. Now, turn the pages a couple of thousand years later. A man named Jesus, the son of Joseph, as a lot of people call him, is preaching his gospel message to a large crowd of his followers. Now, Luke says the crowds literally hung on every word. They were gathered around him by the thousands, literally trampling on each other to try and get as close as they could to this charismatic preacher. And while he's speaking, one lone voice can be heard from the crowd. "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." It sounds like something that could have been said just recently, doesn't it? Joseph responds to this man's request by telling one of his famous parables. And the story he tells goes like this. The land of a rich man, he says, produced abundantly. That sounds a lot like the land of Egypt, doesn't it, during those years of plenty. But this man's newfound abundance puts him in a quandary. He has much more than he needs. So what is he going to do with all the extra? What should I do, he wonders. I don't have any place to store my crops. So he puzzles it through, and after weighing all the options, and maybe after rereading the story of Joseph, he comes up with his plan. I know, he declares, I'll do this. I'll pull down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I'll store up my grain and my goods. In other words, he decides to do exactly what Joseph did. He builds bigger barns to hold all his abundance. And then, with his mind made up and his retirement plans all in place, he settles into bed that night without a care in the world, thinking to himself as he drifts contentedly off to sleep, "Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry." Or to put it in the modern vernacular, "Hey man, your RSP is already fully funded. Don't worry, be happy. You're the poster boy for Freedom 55. Only Jesus doesn't end the parable on that positive note. It seems that this man won't make it to 55. He won't even make it through the night. And God, who knows the deepest secrets of the heart, is not very pleased with his priorities. "You fool," God says to him, "this very night your life is demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? And then Jesus delivers the punchline. So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God. So there you have it. 2 stories of land producing abundantly. In both cases, the 2 protagonists have the same bright idea of building bigger barns to hold all the extra abundance and save it for the future. Yet in Joseph's case, he's praised to this very day for his faith and foresight, while in the case of the man in Jesus' parable, the wealthy landowner was branded a fool by no less an authority as God himself. So, why the difference? And the answer is surely this. In Joseph's case, Joseph understood himself as the steward, the trustee, not the owner of the abundance produced by his land. An abundance that Joseph was storing up in order to be able to distribute to those in need during the lean years that he knew were coming. And through Joseph's wise stewardship and planning, thousands of lives were eventually saved from certain starvation. On the other hand, the wealthy landowner in Jesus' parable was storing up his abundance for his own enjoyment with no concern for others' needs, believing all the ads that proclaimed it's all about me. In the end, his abundant wealth saved no one's life, not even his own. You fool. This very night your life is demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? You know, the more I think about it wasn't his plan for building bigger barns that earned the wealthy landowner the moniker of fool. It was the use he planned to make of his stored wealth that Jesus condemned. Listen again to Jesus' punchline. So it is for those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God. You know, endowment funds in congregations like yours are often criticized by people of good faith as sort of modern-day examples of Jesus' parable of the rich fool, who built bigger barns to hold all his wealth when he should have been figuring out how to share it with others in need. But I think such criticisms, even though they're well-intentioned, misunderstand the purpose of endowment funds and misapply the lessons that we learn from Jesus' parable of the rich fool. As I've already noted, it wasn't the bigger barns that Jesus was condemning. It was the reason the man had for storing his wealth that Jesus found so offensive. I think the wealthy landowner was labeled a fool for 2 reasons. For thinking that it was his wealth to begin with, and secondly, for thinking that he could somehow keep it for himself. You see, the rich fool forgot a fundamental truth of life and of scriptural teaching. You can't take it with you. Does anybody want to disagree with that? Or as one modern pundit joked, I've never seen a hearse towing a U-Haul. But that's not what endowment funds are intended to be. They're a means to invest wealth and keep it growing so that it can keep generating more wealth for future generations to use as needs arise. Congregations that set up endowments, far from following in the footsteps of the rich fool in Jesus' parable, are seeking to follow in the footsteps of Joseph in our Old Testament lesson. I think I'm more and more convinced that the notion that an endowment fund is just building bigger barns is misguided, and a metaphor that I think is much truer to what an endowment fund is really intended to be is that of an oil well. For an oil well doesn't just store wealth, it keeps pumping it out day after day and year after year. Did you know that the Synod of Saskatchewan has just such an oil well? It was given along with the land as a planned gift to the Synod, with the annual royalty checks to be used to fund the camping program in the Synod, providing vitally needed funds to improve camp facilities, to grow the ministries and programs they're able to provide, and scholarships for campers to experience the joy of Christian camping. That Synod isn't just sitting on its resources, in other words, storing them in bigger and bigger barns. No, it's using its resources to provide life-changing camping experiences for children in the Synod for generations to come. Endowment funds are just like that oil well, with one difference. Oil wells will one day run dry. Endowment funds are intended to keep on pumping out the money in perpetuity. I love that phrase, in perpetuity. Now, one such perpetual oil well in the national church level is the Experimental Fund. It was launched by George and Evelyn Van Beek back in 1981. And you'll actually find a picture of George Van Beek on one of your bulletin inserts in your bulletins this morning. The fund was designed as a permanent endowment with the annual income earned from the invested capital to be used to provide grants to encourage congregations and presbyteries and other agencies of the church to launch out in creative new ministries. You see, there was one thing about the Presbyterian Church that drove George Van Beek crazy. It was our practice of doing the same thing over and over and over again, whether it worked or not. That's how he came up with the idea for a fund that actually encouraged Presbyterians to try doing something differently. Since the time it was formed, and through additional gifts from Evelyn through her will and George through his will, the fund has provided more than 280,000 projects, $280,000 for 120 projects across the church. Last year it provided funds for 12 different projects, and there's still $1 million in the fund and growing. Now, let me ask you a question and think about it. Do you think the Van Beeks are modern-day examples of the rich fool in Jesus' parable, or of Joseph in the story of Genesis? I know what I think. I think they're wonderful examples of wise stewards in the tradition of Joseph. Wise stewards who would have a ready answer for the question that God asked the wealthy landowner in Jesus' parable. You remember the question, don't you? This very night your life is demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? Their answer would have been as pointed and direct as the question itself. Our wealth is going to the Presbyterian Church in Canada to help fund new and creative ministries for generations to come. I thank God for the Van Beeks, don't you? Which brings me to why I'm here this Sunday, to help you focus on the enduring value of planned gifts to advance the ministry of St. Andrew's Church far into the future. You know, we're all familiar with the money that we put into the offering plate or other fundraising events. Those gifts normally come from our monthly or current income. We're less familiar with the many ways that we can contribute to the church from the wealth that we accumulate over the course of our lifetimes. These gifts are called planned gifts, and they can be given through a bequest and a will, like Van Beeks, or a gift of stock, or a riff, or a gift of real estate. As a matter of fact, St. Andrew's Church just received such a gift this past week, $67,000 from Elise Devitt to establish the James and Elise Devitt Endowment Fund for inclusion camping at Camp Come On, I Want to Go. As the announcement in your worship bulletin says, inclusion camping is very expensive because it takes one-to-one counseling. But through her generosity, in memory of her husband James, these kinds of special need campers will have the opportunity to experience camping in perpetuity. What a wonderful gift. And what a great sermon illustration, because what's not said in your bulletin is the form in which she made her gift. It was imperial oil stock. And if that's not a perfect example for my sermon, and a wonderful gift for the future of St. Andrew's, I don't know what it is. And Elise's generous gift is really just the most recent. She's part of a long parade of folks here at St. Andrew's who have remembered your church and its ministry in their estate plans. Over the last 5 years, nearly more than $500,000 have been used for projects and ministries here at St. Andrew's and in the larger community. That's money over and above money that you would put week by week in your offering plate. So as you think about James and Elise Devitt Endowment Fund and your other trust funds, I ask you not to think of them as just bigger storage barns to hold all your wealth so that you can say as a congregation, "Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry." Now think of your funds as they were intended to be. Think of them as perpetual oil wells that will keep on churning out money year after year after year to enable you to maintain this facility and expand your ministry in Kitchener and throughout the world for generations to come. I'd like to share with you just one last story. A while ago, I was talking with a friend who is a gift planner at the Catholic Archdiocese of Toronto, and he told me about a gift that he'd arranged for a woman in one of the parishes in the Toronto area. He was talking with her after worship at the coffee hour, and she said to him, "You know, I love coffee hour. It's a great time to see old friends and make new ones. But there's one thing," she said, "that really bugs me." "What's that?" he asked. "Well, it's that doggone basket they put by the coffee urn. I never know how much to put in. And if I don't have any change or whatever, I feel guilty for drinking it. I think it should be free. Christian hospitality should be free grace." She was on her soapbox now. Well, he listened for a little while longer, and then he responded, "Well, you know, you can do something about that." "Me?" she said. "Really? What could I do?" "Well, you could set up an endowment that would pay for the coffee and refreshments Sunday after Sunday in perpetuity." There's that word again. "And it really wouldn't cost that much to do it." And you know what? That's exactly what she did. She gave a gift of stock, like Elise did, which was designated for coffee hour. And guess what? Now there's no more basket by the coffee. "Well, did you thank her in any way?" I said, "That's a great story." And he said, "We sure did." "Well, what did you do?" I asked. "We gave her the basket." We both had a good laugh. And isn't that a wonderful story? And a wonderful gift for her congregation that will keep of fresh, hot coffee for generations to come. The good news of planned giving is that we can all have a voice in where all the things that we store up over the course of our lifetimes will go. Through the planned gifts that we arrange today, we too can have a ready answer to the question God asked the wealthy landowner in Jesus' parable. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? We can answer. I'm giving a portion of my estate to the church to ensure that the gospel will continue to be preached and God's love continue to be shared here in Canada and around the world for generations to come. After all, the simple, undeniable truth is that we can't take it with us. But we can leave a lasting legacy that keeps on giving and giving and giving long after we have passed away. Fresh, hot coffee, Sunday after Sunday, and fresh new hope, day after day for generations to come. George and Evelyn Van Beek are both deceased. A tombstone marks their graves, but the gifts they gave through their wills helped provide funding for 12 different ministry projects just this past year. That's the power of planned giving. I have a plaque on the wall in my office that has these words: "They are not dead who leave their love behind." The only question for us then is this: what will we